Hi everyone and welcome back to some more Long War 2. So, let's continue where we left off, and we will upgrade the Shadow Chamber right away and get started on the project. That will take 3 days only, and it will cost us 40 intel. Alright, let's get started. And back to the bridge. So now we have to finish the project, then do avatar autopsy, and then infiltrate the network tower. We'll see how that goes. What? They already increased avatar project progress? Okay. Well, that was quick. Wait, what? Again? Seriously? Alright, so there goes my entire plan. It only took a few hours for them to get 3 pips. Well, I guess that means that's basically the end of this campaign. There goes my entire plan. Out of the window. Not much point even checking these missions, because there's nothing I can do to reduce avatar project progress. Okay then. Well, I suppose this would be a good moment to talk about my overall impressions about Long War 2. About the good, the bad and the ugly. So let's talk about one of the biggest flaws of Long War 2, which is how obscured some of the mechanics on the strategic layer are. If you want to learn from experience, just play the game and figure it out as you go. There's a pretty good chance you won't even be aware of some of the game mechanics that exist on the strategic layer. You won't even know they exist until you learn from someone who does, or until you go through the game files and find the information that you need. So that's a big problem, especially since there's basically just one way to play the game correctly, quote-unquote, on the strategic layer. If you're not playing it the one proper way, then you are basically doing it wrong. And that has to do with various mechanics, such as the dark events. So in Long War 2, as you are probably aware, you can only counter dark events if they spawn in the regions that you are already controlling. They can spawn anywhere on the map. And if you didn't make contact with that region, you will never be able to detect a mission that will counter that dark event, which can lead to a situation where you will not be able to counter the majority of the dark events in the game, especially early on. Even if you rush the regions as fast as you possibly can, you simply can't do it fast enough, because you can still get unlucky enough so that all the dark events will spawn way outside of your territory and you will never get a chance to counter them. You will be physically unable to counter them. I think in this entire campaign I only got a chance to counter dark events a handful of times, and it was very often way too late to actually do it, with only 1 or 2 days left on the timer. But at least then you can actually try to do something. Early into the campaign you can get completely screwed by some of the really bad dark events. There are some really rough ones which will mess up your campaign, so sometimes the difficulty of the early game will vary drastically based on what kinds of dark events you got early on. And then you got the tactical dark events, which, if you're not aware, will give the aliens a permanent bonus for the rest of the game, and you cannot do anything to remove them once they trigger. They will stay active for the rest of the game. Now, I understand the reasoning behind this. It's supposed to give Advent some sense of progression, they will get stronger over time. The problem is that some of them are really rough, and if you get them very early into your campaign, and you'll have to deal with them for the rest of it, the difficulty will increase drastically. One possible way to fix this to some extent would be to disallow certain dark events until later into the game. So for example, until several months in, or until Advent hits some kind of arbitrary milestone, things like that. Basically to prevent some of the worst dark events from firing right at the start of your campaign and increasing the difficulty drastically. And it would be nice if dark events couldn't spawn more than 1 region away from your territory. That way you would actually have a chance to try countering them. It would still be kind of random, or maybe let you know which regions they are in. Right now, you just can't do a whole lot. You have to guess, or get lucky. It's just one huge RNG roll. And it takes a fairly major part of the game out, because in a regular campaign you often have to make these decisions, which dark event to counter, and these are often very interesting decisions. because you have to decide between which event to counter, which rewards to get from the guerrilla ops, so it's actually a very interesting decision to make. But in Long War 2 campaign, you often just won't get a chance to make that decision, like ever, because they will all spawn way outside of your territory, so not only you won't get to choose which one you want to counter, you won't get a chance to counter any of them. So the way I see it, it takes what was an interesting decision out of the game. So that's one of the bigger flaws, in my opinion at least. There would be more interesting ways to handle it, while still giving the player some kind of choice. So then we got mechanics such as Vigilance and Advent Strength, and while you can see Advent Strength on the map, because that's information you are given, and while you don't know exactly how to influence it, you can guess how to influence it, you don't even know Vigilance is a thing, because the game doesn't really tell you. And if you don't understand Vigilance mechanics, you will lose your campaign. Like, straight up, you will lose your campaign. One of the most common complaints that I've seen about an average Long War 2 campaign is how fast the Avatar project goes later into the game, that it becomes basically a race to the finish line. But it can influence that, except that there's almost no possible way you will figure it out on your own, because it has to do with Vigilance mechanics. You need to know how to slow down the Avatar project, or you will simply either lose, or you will end up rushing to the finish line. And very likely lose just before your campaign is over, in a very anticlimactic end. Like in my campaign right now, that was a very anticlimactic end, the way I see it. So I'm not a big fan of that. I'm generally not a big fan of difficulty through obscurity, because a lot of these things are not that difficult to counter if you know how, and if you know that these mechanics are even there to begin with. The difficulty comes from the fact that they are so obscured you will often not even know about their existence. And I'm just not a big fan of that. It's not how a good strategy game should work, in my opinion. Yours might be different, that's cool, but I've never been a fan of difficulty through obscurity. However, there are positive things about the strategic layer, so one of the biggest changes in Long War 2 is the whole infiltration mechanic. And while it has its issues, I enjoy it a lot, because it gives you a lot of interesting decisions to make, and anything that gives you, the player, interesting decisions to make that have consequences, that can change your strategy, that can change your gameplay, are a good thing in a strategy game. After all, strategy games are all about making strategic decisions, right? So infiltration mechanics give you exactly that. So I do like them, even though they have some minor flaws here and there, but overall that's one of the most positive changes on the strategic layer. Then we got the tactical gameplay. So overall I enjoy tactical gameplay in Long War 2. The changes are mostly positive, from my perspective. But yes, there's always a but. There are a few buts actually. So one of the biggest problems is how strongly Long War 2 favors stealth missions. And yes, I know this is partially addressed in 1.3, but I won't be talking about what will come to the game in the future. I'm talking about the current state. And also, I'm not entirely convinced 1.3 changes will actually address this point entirely, but that's for a whole different discussion. In any case, I very much dislike how strongly Long War 2 favors stealth missions, because as it stands right now, with the current state of the game, with the current state of Long War 2, doing stealth missions with a shinobi, maybe a specialist, with 2, maybe 3 soldiers, is the most optimal way to do 70-80% of all the missions in the game. And XCOM 2 is not a game built with stealth in mind. It's not made to be a stealth game, it's not its strength. Its strength is tactical gameplay, the combat. That's what it's good at. That's what I enjoy the most about XCOM 2. And the fact doing stealth missions is the most optimal way to handle like 70-80% of them is, from my perspective, one of the biggest fails of Long War 2. You can always argue that you don't have to do it. Yes, obviously you don't have to. But we're talking about the situation where you want to play in the most optimal way to maximize your chances to win the campaign. Because with how hard it is to actually win a Long War 2 campaign, you often have to play in an optimal way. That's what always Long War was about, including Long War 1. if you don't optimize your gameplay, you will fail. So if your goal is to succeed, because it might not be, you can just go out guns blazing and have fun losing, there's nothing wrong with that, absolutely not. But if you want to actually succeed, you have to optimize. So you will end up doing a lot of stealth missions. And if you don't enjoy those, because there's always a chance that you will lose a stealth mission and you will not be able to do anything about it. There are many different situations where you just won't have any options, you will lose, period. Or you will have to abort. Same thing, basically fail the mission, maybe not lose, but fail. You can still get your soldiers out while failing the objective. So if you don't enjoy that part of the game, you probably won't enjoy Long War 2. Now again, 1.3 patch might address that. I've not had the chance to play it, obviously, because it won't be out for a while, but I'm not entirely convinced. Right now, from what I've seen, I still think doing stealth missions will be the most optimal way to do it, it's just that they will be harder. So in a sense, it might make the problem even worse. Obviously, I have to actually play first. So this is pure speculation on my part. But that's certainly the part of the tactical gameplay that I disliked the most. Another one has to do with dark events. There are many tactical dark events that will increase the alien stats drastically. And you will start seeing multiple opponents with 100 aim or even higher than that. There are so many opponents that can get 90 or 100 aim, which will lead to a situation where you will flashbang the opponents and they will end up with aim higher than yours, after they get disoriented, which is kind of ridiculous. And actually, after I turned on Red Fog, I've been getting the impression that Long War 2 tactical gameplay was balanced with Red Fog in mind. Now this might or might not be the case, but the tactical gameplay feels a lot more balanced with Red Fog turned on. Yes, Red Fog will also affect you, obviously, that's kind of the point, but it actually gives you a way better chance against enemies with ridiculously high aim. Because while you won't completely neutralize them by wounding them, you can do some damage to lower their aim to more reasonable levels, not 100. And if you don't use Red Fog, they will still hit you very reliably and just kill you even if they are down to 2 out of 18 health. A lot of them have ridiculously high health as well, and it's very tough to deal with all of them at the same time. So turning on Red Fog makes it a lot more reasonable. The game feels much more balanced with Red Fog turned on. And speaking of balance, if you do kind of enjoy stealth missions from time to time, they feel way better with a mod like True Concealment turned on. Because the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems, is that one of the points of doing stealth missions is to have information, is to scout for information. But you won't really get a chance to scout for information with how tight some of the timers are. You have to make it to the objective in time. You won't get a chance to scout around the map, to check the patrol routes, to then plan your strategy around the patrol routes. Yes, you can throw a battle scanner or two, but you have to basically guess where the patrols will be and what their patrol routes will be. With True Concealment turned on, the timer will not run as long as your squad is concealed. So until you lose your concealment, the timer will not run, which gives you a chance to actually scout around the map and check the patrol routes, and then plan your strategy accordingly. These missions started to be much more fun after True Concealment was turned on in my campaign. And it makes more sense thematically. I mean, with the infiltration mechanic, you can launch the mission anytime you want while you are infiltrating. So if the enemies don't know you're actually there because you infiltrated the facility, why is the timer running? They didn't see you are there. So that doesn't even make a lot of sense. From my point of view, True Concealment 1 makes more sense, 2 actually makes stealth missions kind of more fun. I still think XCOM 2 simply isn't a game made with stealth in mind, but it does make them bearable, and it makes them kind of fun here and there, just not 80% of them. That's an issue that really needs to be addressed. So another thing I strongly disliked, and we'll go back to the strategic layer for a moment, is that you need to have facility leads to be able to destroy facilities, the avatar facilities. Because if you don't get leads, you won't even see the facilities. In Long War 2, as opposed to vanilla XCOM 2, you need to research a facility lead to actually detect an existing facility. So first you research the lead, and then you can make contact with that region, or maybe you already had a contact with that region, and then you can set up a mission that will sabotage the facility. If you don't get leads, you will never be able to sabotage any facilities. And the problem is that unless you use a mod that changes this, getting facility leads depends heavily on RNG. If you get unlucky and you don't get facility leads, that will basically cost you the campaign. It can easily cost you the campaign. You will simply not be able to slow down the Avatar project enough. There are other ways to slow down the Avatar project, but chances are you will have to deal with at least a couple of facilities throughout your campaign, and there's a very real chance that you simply won't be able to do that. There are some mods that address this problem, but right now we are talking about the base Long War 2 experience without any additional mods. Use a mod can always be an answer. Long War 2 itself is a mod, so you can mod anything you like. You can always edit the files yourself if you don't like something, so that can always be kind of a valid answer to any issue you have. But right now we are talking about the overall balance of Long War 2 as a mod. Having said all that, I did enjoy a lot of the more in-depth mechanics of Long War 2, and overall it's a positive experience, but some of the major points that I just talked about can sour it a little bit. And it can definitely discourage you. And ultimately, whether it's the deciding factor or not, depends on personal preferences. Maybe some of these things won't bother you, or maybe even you will consider them as a positive, or maybe you will dislike them to the point where you would prefer to go back to regular XCOM 2 with something like a better Advent 2 mod. Because there are quite a few really good mods that have nothing to do with Long War 2. A better Advent 2 is a pretty damn good example, in my opinion. A better Advent 2 makes late game enemies more interesting in ways other than in just increasing their stats. Because there's quite a lot of stat inflation in Long War 2, that's certainly how I feel about it. Which is one of the reasons why I really think that Long War 2 was balanced with Red Fog in mind. And Red Fog is not enabled by default. You have to go and enable it yourself. And I think that's that. There are a few more things I could talk about, like the Graze band, but the Graze band comes down to personal preferences. I don't mind it, it does make tactical gameplay more interesting in my book. The only issue with Graze band is that it's kind of poorly explained. The game could certainly do a better job of explaining how exactly it works. I've seen a lot of confusion in my comments about how exactly it works, and I've seen a lot of people who got it wrong, even after many missions. So yeah, that's one of the problems with it. But overall, I don't mind Graze band. It hurts you and helps you as much as it hurts and helps your opponent. And I think that's going to be it. These are my final unscripted thoughts about Long War 2. I'm sure I missed a few major talking points, but these are just my loose thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this campaign. Thanks for watching and for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you next time.